It was a quiet Wednesday evening in Atlanta, and Danielle Rivers had just finished her 12-hour shift at the hospital. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair tied up, and all she wanted was to grab some groceries and go home to rest. She pulled into the parking lot of Westbrook Market, a store she'd shopped at countless times before. Inside, she greeted the cashier with a tired smile, picked up a basket, and started walking through the aisles. As she reached for a carton of milk, she noticed a man in a black polo shirt staring at her from the end of the aisle. She ignored it at first, thinking he was just another shopper. But every time she turned a corner, he was there, watching. That man was Mr. Collins, the store manager. Into him, Danielle looked suspicious. A young black woman with a tote bag, shopping alone after hours, it fit the story in his mind. Danielle placed her items on the self-checkout lane, scanned each barcode carefully, and slipped everything neatly into her bag. She was halfway to the door when a firm voice called out, "Ma'am, hold up a second." She turned around. It was Mr. Collins, his arms folded tight, eyes hard. "Yes?" she asked, confused. "I need you to step aside," he said. "We have reason to believe you've concealed store merchandise without paying." The room seemed to go silent. People in line turned to stare. A woman whispered to her husband. Danielle blinked, her throat dry. "Excuse me," she said. "I paid for everything. You can check." "Ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be," Collins said, his tone colder. "We saw you take an item from aisle 4 and put it in your bag." Her chest tightened. "That's not true. I didn't even go down that aisle." He didn't care. "Follow me to the back," he ordered. "We'll sort it out there." And as Danielle followed him toward the back office, she felt every eye in the store on her, judging, whispering, recording. Her only crime? Looking like someone who could steal. The fluorescent lights in the security office buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow on the dull gray walls. It was a cramped space, barely large enough for the desk, 2 chairs, and a flickering monitor showing grainy camera feeds. Mr. Collins shut the door behind them with a heavy click. "Empty your bag on the table," he said, crossing his arms. Danielle's hands trembled slightly as she set her tote down. She wasn't afraid because she was guilty, she was afraid because she wasn't. She'd heard stories like this before. One by one, she laid out her items: milk, cereal, fruit, vitamins, and a loaf of bread. Then she reached into her pocket and placed the long paper receipt beside them. "Everything I bought is right here," she said quietly. But Collins barely looked. "You're missing something," he insisted. "A compact makeup case from aisle 4. You were seen slipping it into your bag." Danielle frowned. "Makeup? I don't even wear makeup. Look at me, I came straight from work." Collins' jaw tightened. "We have footage," he said flatly. "Then show me," she replied. He paused, avoiding her eyes. "We don't show footage to customers. Store policy." Danielle's patience snapped. "So you can accuse me of stealing but can't prove it?" Collins smirked. "You'll have your chance to explain, to the police." Her heart stopped. "You're calling the police? Over what, exactly?" He turned to the radio clipped to his belt and said calmly, "Security, call APD. We've got a theft suspect in the office." The next 10 minutes felt like a blur. 2 police officers arrived, one older, one young and nervous. They took her ID, asked her questions, and glanced at Collins like he was their supervisor. "Ma'am, we just need to verify what happened," one of them said. "Verify?" Danielle asked bitterly. "You haven't even looked at the receipt." Outside, through the narrow office window, she saw customers peeking in, whispering. Someone even held up a phone, recording. Her name, her face, her dignity, on display for everyone to judge. When one officer asked her to step outside until things were sorted, Danielle's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. As she stood under the harsh parking lot lights, she whispered to herself, "This can't be happening. Not to me." But it was. And deep down, she knew this wasn't about a makeup case. It was about what she looked like. The parking lot lights flickered weakly in the misty Atlanta evening. Danielle stood near the curb, arms crossed tight against her chest, as two police officers murmured near the patrol car. Every breath came shallow, every glance from strangers burned like a spotlight. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus." She answered on the first ring. "Marcus, they're saying I stole something," she said, voice trembling. "Who's they?" "The store manager, some man named Collins. He won't even show me the footage." "Don't say another word to them," Marcus said sharply. "I'm on my way." 15 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot and came to a stop beside her. Marcus stepped out, tall, composed, his suit jacket still crisp from his law internship that day. He wasn't a lawyer yet, but he had learned how to move like one. He took one look at his sister, eyes red, hands shaking, and his jaw clenched. "Where is he?" Danielle pointed toward the glass doors of Westbrook Market. Mr. Collins stood near the entrance, arms folded, still talking to one of the officers. His expression was smug, almost satisfied, as if justice had already been served. Marcus walked straight toward him. "Excuse me," he said, stepping between Collins and the officers. "My name is Marcus Rivers. This is my sister you accused of theft." Collins raised a brow. And I'd like to know what evidence you have for that accusation." The older officer shifted awkwardly. "Sir, this is between the store and your sister. If you could—" "No," Marcus cut him off. "This is between right and wrong. You've detained her, humiliated her in public, and you can't even produce proof. So I'll ask again, what evidence?" Collins smirked, hands on his hips. "We have surveillance footage that shows her putting an item in her bag." Marcus's tone stayed calm but cold. "Then let's see it." "That's not how this works," Collins replied. "Footage is for internal review and police investigation, not customers." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "You accused her publicly, had officers show up, and made her stand in a parking lot while strangers filmed her, and you won't show the footage?" Collins shrugged. "Company policy." Danielle watched from behind her brother, fighting the urge to cry again. Marcus turned slightly to the officers. "Officers, are you detaining my sister?" The younger one stammered. No sir, not exactly." "Then she's free to leave," Marcus said. "Unless you plan to arrest her without probable cause." The older officer sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, sir, we were told by store management that there was video evidence. We're just responding to a call." "Then respond properly," Marcus snapped. "Ask to see the footage. That's the only way you'll know if a crime occurred." The officers exchanged glances. Collins stiffened, the confidence draining slightly from his posture. "We can't just let shoplifters walk," Collins said. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice but sharpening every word. "And you can't just accuse black women of crimes because your gut tells you something. My sister works 12-hour hospital shifts. She pays for everything she touches. The only thing she's guilty of is making you uncomfortable." Collins flinched but tried to keep his composure. "Sir, I don't appreciate that implication." "You don't have to appreciate it," Marcus replied. "You just have to stop acting like it isn't true." The air between them tightened. Even the officers stayed quiet. Marcus reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a slim black notebook. He opened it, clicked his pen, and began writing. Let's make this official. Name? I already told you, Collins. Full name? Greg Collins. Position? Store manager. And your employee ID? Collins blinked. Why do you need that? Because you made a false accusation against my sister, Marcus said, voice rising. And unless you can produce video evidence right now, this is defamation, false imprisonment, and racial profiling. A hush fell over the area. Even a few customers who had lingered by the doorway stopped pretending to shop and began to watch openly. This is ridiculous, Collins muttered. She was acting suspicious. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Suspicious how? She kept looking around, checking her bag. You mean she looked tired after a 12-hour shift and carried her own tote bag instead of using your cheap plastic ones? That's not what I... No, please, Marcus interrupted. Explain to me what about that seemed suspicious enough to call the police. Collins opened his mouth but said nothing. Danielle finally spoke up. Her voice trembled but carried weight. He followed me around the store, Marcus. From aisle to aisle. I saw him whispering to another worker. I thought maybe he was asking if I needed help. Turns out, he was preparing to embarrass me. Marcus turned back to Collins. You hear that? You stalked her, accused her, and called the police, all without proof. The younger officer finally cleared his throat. Sir, maybe we should check the footage. The older one nodded slowly. Yeah, that might be best. Collins shifted uncomfortably. It's store policy not to show customers. You can show it to us, the officer said, cutting him off. We're part of the investigation. That was the first crack in his armor. His lips pressed together tightly as he led them back into the building, down the narrow hall to the security office. Danielle hesitated at the door, but Marcus gave her a small nod. It's okay. We'll handle this. Inside, the room felt even smaller than before. The monitor still glowed faintly with camera feeds. Collins sat down and clicked a few buttons on the keyboard. There, he said, pointing at the screen. That's her. Marcus leaned in, arms folded. The footage showed Danielle entering the store, basket in hand. She moved down aisle 2, then 3, then 6. She picked up milk, bread, and fruit, no makeup, no sudden movements, no hiding. Marcus spoke first. That's aisle 6, not 4. Collins scrolled forward nervously. Wait. Maybe it's this part. He clicked again. Danielle appeared near the checkout line, adjusting her tote bag. For a split second, her back was turned to the camera. Collins froze the frame. See that? Right there, she reached into her bag. Marcus exhaled slowly. You mean that moment when she put her wallet back inside after paying? Collins frowned. It's hard to tell. No, Marcus said firmly. It's not hard to tell. Play it again. He did. Danielle was seen scanning each item, placing them in her tote, pulling out her card, and paying at the self-checkout. Then, she dropped her wallet into her bag and grabbed the receipt. The officers exchanged looks. The younger one scratched his chin. I don't see any concealment. Me neither, said the older officer. Marcus straightened up, eyes never leaving Collins. Now show me aisle 4. The aisle you claim she stole from. Collins hesitated, then clicked again. A new feed appeared, aisle 4, lined with beauty products. Danielle never appeared. Not once. Silence filled the room. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but cutting. You just humiliated my sister in front of half your store. You called the police. You dragged her reputation through the mud. And your own footage proves you were wrong. Collins swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. Maybe it was another customer, he muttered weakly. You didn't think to check before calling the police? Marcus said. You just saw a black woman with a bag and assumed she was stealing? Danielle's voice cracked as she spoke. Do you know how that feels? I work every day taking care of people, cleaning wounds, lifting patients, listening to them cry, and I come here to buy groceries, and you treat me like a criminal. Her words landed like stones in the room. The officers stood quietly, unsure whether to speak. Marcus turned to them. Officers, I want this documented. My sister was falsely accused, detained, and humiliated with no evidence. I want your body cams to note everything that happened from the moment you arrived. The older officer nodded. We'll make a note in the report. Good, Marcus said, turning back to Collins. Because if this video somehow disappears, I'll subpoena it. And when this hits the news, I want people to see exactly how you treat your customers. Collins looked like he wanted to disappear. His voice softened, almost pleading. Look, I made a mistake. I was just trying to do my job. Marcus laughed bitterly. Your job isn't to protect the store, it's to protect your ego. You saw her and assumed the worst. That's not a mistake, Mr. Collins. That's a mindset. For a long moment, no one said a word. The only sound was the faint hum of the monitor. Finally, Danielle stepped forward. Her hands no longer trembled. Her eyes no longer looked defeated. I don't want your apology, she said. I just want you to remember this the next time you look at someone who looks like me. Because you don't see us as people, you see us as threats. She turned to leave, but Marcus lingered a moment longer, staring at Collins. You're lucky, he said quietly. Because if it were up to me, this store would be shut down by morning. Then he followed his sister out of the room. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, lighter, free. Danielle leaned against the car, taking a deep breath. The tears she'd been holding back finally came, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from release. Marcus stood beside her, silent for a moment. Then he spoke softly. You handled that better than most people ever could. She laughed bitterly. I shouldn't have had to handle it at all. He nodded. You're right. But now, we make sure it never happens to someone else. He looked back at the store one last time, the glowing Westbrook Market sign flickering in the dark. Somewhere inside, Collins sat at his desk, replaying the footage over and over, the moment his prejudice met reality and lost. And for the first time that night, Marcus smiled faintly. Justice wasn't complete, but truth had spoken. Loud enough that no camera could silence it. The next morning, sunlight poured softly through the thin curtains of Danielle's apartment. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't get up to the sound of her alarm. Her scrubs lay folded neatly at the edge of the bed, untouched. She sat there in silence, staring at the floor, replaying every detail of the night before. The echo of Collins' voice. The flash of police lights outside the store. The looks on people's faces when they whispered and stared. It wasn't the false accusation that hurt most, it was the way everyone had believed it so easily. The phone buzzed again. It was Marcus. Morning, Danny, he said softly when she picked up. Hey. You sleep? Barely. You need to eat something. She sighed. I can't even think about food. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. The way he said we saw you steal, like he already knew I was guilty. Marcus paused. You want me to come over? No, she whispered. I just need a little time. But he came anyway. 30 minutes later, he was knocking on her door with takeout coffee and a bag of warm pastries. She let him in wordlessly, and they sat at her kitchen table. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet filled the room like heavy fog. Finally, Marcus broke it. "I stopped by the store this morning," he said carefully. Danielle's head lifted. "Why?" "To talk to corporate. There was a regional supervisor there. I told her what happened." She tensed. "Marcus, I told you I didn't want to make a scene." "This isn't about making a scene," he said calmly. "It's about accountability." He leaned forward. They reviewed the footage again. The supervisor apologized, genuinely. She said the situation was deeply regrettable. And guess what? Collins is suspended pending review. Danielle didn't respond right away. She just stared at her coffee, watching the steam fade into the air. "Suspended," she murmured finally. "That's it?" Marcus exhaled. "For now. I told them we're considering filing a formal complaint." That's when she started taking notes. Danielle nodded slowly, but her expression stayed distant. "Marcus, you know what the worst part was?" He looked at her gently. "What?" "The way people looked at me. Like they already believed I did it. The police, the shoppers, nobody even asked if I was okay. They just stared. Like I was the stereotype they'd always imagined." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I've worked my whole life to be more than that. To be respected. To be safe. But none of that mattered in that moment." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know. And you shouldn't have had to prove your innocence just to be treated like a person." They sat in silence again. The kind of silence that feels like healing and breaking at the same time. After a long pause, Danielle spoke again. "What happens now?" "We document everything," Marcus said. "Every word, every action. If they try to sweep this under the rug, we'll go through legal channels. Quietly. Professionally. I don't want to ruin anyone's life," she whispered. "You're not ruining his life," Marcus said. "He tried to ruin yours." That afternoon, Danielle went for a walk around her neighborhood. The air was cool and soft, kids played near the corner store, and a few neighbors waved. But even simple gestures felt heavier now. She found herself double-checking every movement, every glance. A part of her no longer trusted the world to see her clearly. She stopped by a park bench, sat down, and just listened, to the wind, to the faint sound of traffic, to her own heartbeat. "You're still here," she whispered to herself. They didn't take that. Later that week, Marcus called her again. "You should know, corporate reached back out," he said. "They've completed their review." Danielle took a slow breath. "And?" "They've terminated Collins' employment. The report says he violated anti-discrimination policy and misused security procedures." She froze. She didn't feel joy or relief, just quiet disbelief. "He's gone?" "Yeah. Gone." "What did he say?" Apparently he tried to claim he was following protocol, but once they saw the footage again, there was no defending it. Danielle sat back, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her. "I should feel better," she said softly. "But I don't." Marcus's voice gentled. "It's okay not to. Justice doesn't always feel like peace. Sometimes it just means the truth finally stood up for you." She nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see it. A week passed. Then another. Life slowly returned to its rhythm, work, errands, nights at home. But something inside Danielle had changed. She still shopped for groceries, but not at Westbrook Market. She couldn't bring herself to go near that place again. Her coworkers noticed she was quieter. When they asked if she was okay, she just smiled faintly and said she was fine. But inside, she was rebuilding something deeper than peace, self-trust. Every day, she reminded herself. You did nothing wrong. You didn't deserve it. You are not their assumption. She began journaling again, something she hadn't done in years. Her first entry was simple. I was accused of theft. I wasn't believed. But the truth stayed patient. The truth waited for its turn. And when it came, it spoke louder than their doubt. That line became her anchor. One rainy evening, 2 weeks later, Danielle was finishing a shift when she heard someone call her name. Danielle? She turned to see a familiar face, Officer Graham, the younger of the two officers from that night. He removed his cap, his eyes unsure but sincere. I'm sorry if this is weird, he began, but I just wanted to apologize. For how things went down at the store. Danielle blinked in surprise. You don't have to do that. Yeah, I do, he said quietly. We came in there assuming the worst. I saw the footage later when the report was finalized. You were telling the truth. You were calm the whole time. And I realized. I wasn't. Danielle looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small, weary smile. Thank you, she said softly. It means something to hear that. He nodded. I'm still learning. But that night changed how I see people. I guess, it changed how I see myself, too. When he walked away, Danielle stood in the rain for a long moment, silent, thoughtful. The world wasn't suddenly fair. But maybe, just maybe, it was still capable of learning. A few days later, she visited her mother's house for Sunday dinner. The familiar smell of baked chicken and sweet potatoes filled the air. Her mother, Mrs. Rivers, hugged her tightly at the door. You holding up, baby? Trying to. They sat at the kitchen table, just like old times. After a while, Mrs. Rivers spoke. You know, when I was your age, I went through something like that. Back then, we didn't have cameras or proof. They called me a liar, and that was the end of it. Danielle looked at her mother, eyes wide. What did you do? I kept my head high. I kept living. Because the one thing they can't take from you is your truth. No matter how loud their lies are. Danielle reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. I think I understand that now. That night, back home, she sat by her window with a notebook in her lap. The street below shimmered with rain. She began to write again, slowly, carefully. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't come with applause or headlines. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment when the truth stands tall, and the lie falls apart. I don't need everyone to know what happened. I just need to know it didn't break me. She closed the notebook and smiled faintly to herself. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, but Danielle didn't flinch. The storm no longer frightened her. She'd already been through one, and she was still standing. The next morning, the sunlight came in thin and colorless through the blinds, slicing across the floor like ribbons of pale gold. Danielle lay awake long before her alarm, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer answers. The hum of the city outside sounded distant, muffled, unreal. Her phone had buzzed through the night, texts from coworkers, her brother Marcus, even a few people she hadn't spoken to in years, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. Everyone wanted to know what happened at Westbrook Market. Everyone wanted a statement. But she didn't want to explain, to relive the humiliation, to reduce her pain to a headline. She wanted silence. When she finally rose, her reflection in the mirror startled her. The woman staring back looked tired, hollow around the eyes, but there was something else there too, a spark she hadn't noticed before. It was faint, but steady, like the first ember in cold ash. That ember was anger, yes, but also something stronger, resolve. By Monday, she forced herself to return to the hospital. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and coffee. A few colleagues gave her tentative smiles, others avoided her altogether, unsure what to say. But when she stepped into her ward, the familiar rhythm of work wrapped around her like armor. She adjusted IVs, charted vitals, and listened to patients' stories, their fears, their pains, their small triumphs. And slowly, she remembered why she'd chosen this life, because healing others always reminded her of how people could begin again. At lunchtime, her friend Keisha slid into the chair across from her in the cafeteria. "Girl," Keisha said softly, "I saw the look on your face when you walked in. You're not broken." Danielle managed a weak smile. "I don't feel broken," she said. "Just changed." "Changed how?" "Like I've been shown something I can't unsee. That no matter how hard you work, how kind you are, someone can still decide you're the villain." Keisha reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then make them regret deciding that. Lives so loud, so right, that their lives fall apart on their own." Something about that sentence stayed with Danielle for days. Lives so loud, so right. That weekend, Marcus stopped by her apartment. He carried takeout from their favorite Jamaican spot, the smell of jerk chicken filling the air. "You been eating?" he asked. "Trying to," she said, cracking a smile. They ate in silence for a while. The TV murmured in the background, news anchors talking about storms in Florida, an election in some other state. Ordinary noise. Then Marcus leaned forward. "You know, sis, I keep thinking about that day. How calm you were, even when they had no proof. You never raised your voice. What would have been the point?" "The point," he said, "is they wanted you to lose it. That's the trick. Make you angry so they can say, 'See? We were right.' You didn't give them that." Danielle looked down at her plate. "I didn't feel calm," she said quietly. "I felt small. Like nothing I said mattered." Marcus shook his head. "You weren't small. You were controlled. There's a difference." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind he always carried. "You don't have to do anything big right now. Just write it down. Everything you felt. Everything they said. Don't let them take the truth from you." She nodded slowly. That night, after he left, she opened her journal and wrote for hours. Every word spilled out like a storm breaking loose, the humiliation, the fear, the fury, and the silence that followed. By the time she closed the notebook, her hands were shaking, but her chest felt lighter. She realized something: writing didn't erase what happened, but it gave her control over the story. And that control was a kind of power. 2 weeks later, she did something even Marcus hadn't expected. She went back to Westbrook Market. She parked in the same spot where she'd stood that night, hands trembling under the glare of the police lights. For a moment, she sat in her car, staring at the sliding glass doors. Her stomach knotted. "You don't owe them anything," she whispered to herself. "But I owe me something." Inside, the store was quiet, half empty. She could feel eyes following her, though she didn't know if that was paranoia or truth. A new manager stood behind the counter, an older black woman named Ms. Green, who had replaced Mr. Collins after the investigation. Collins had resigned a week after the security footage cleared Danielle completely. Apparently, the corporate office wanted the scandal buried quietly. When Ms. Green saw her, she smiled gently. "Ms. Rivers, I was hoping you'd come by." "I didn't think I would," Danielle admitted. "But I needed to see it for myself." Ms. Green nodded. "What happened to you was wrong. And I can't fix that. But I can promise it won't happen again in my store." Danielle looked around the aisles, the same aisles where strangers had whispered about her, where she'd been made to feel like a thief. But now, she walked through them with her head high. At the checkout, a young cashier looked up and said quietly, "I saw the footage. I'm sorry, Ms. Rivers." Danielle met her eyes and smiled softly. "Thank you. But don't be sorry for me. Be better than them." As she left the store, something inside her loosened. Not forgiveness, she wasn't ready for that, but freedom. Back home, she stood before her mirror again. For the first time in weeks, she didn't see the woman who'd been accused or humiliated. She saw someone who had walked through fire and didn't burn. She saw someone who refused to be defined by other people's fear. Her journal lay open on the dresser, pages filled with her story, raw, honest, unflinching. She added one final note at the bottom of the page. "I am not what they saw. I am what I chose to become afterward." She closed the book gently and looked at her reflection one last time before turning off the light. Tomorrow, she would wake up and keep living. Not in spite of what happened, but beyond it. For weeks after returning to the store, Danielle moved through her days with a new kind of steadiness. The anger still flickered inside her, but it no longer ruled her, it fueled her. She stopped avoiding people's eyes. When strangers stared too long, she met their gaze and didn't look away. At work, she noticed how differently patients spoke to her now. Maybe it was her posture, or the new quiet confidence in her voice, but people seemed to trust her faster. A woman recovering from surgery once whispered, "You look like you've seen something and made peace with it." Danielle just smiled and said, "Not peace. Power." That night she wrote in her journal, "Some weights you carry until they make you stronger. Then you put them down, not because you forget, but because you don't need them anymore." One Friday, while dropping off donations at a small community center near her neighborhood, she overheard two teenage girls arguing with a volunteer. They'd been accused of taking snacks from the storage shelf. The volunteer's voice was sharp, the girls' faces tight with fear. Danielle's chest clenched. It was too familiar, the defensive tone, the trembling hands, the unspoken accusation written across their skin color. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "What's going on here?" The volunteer, the young man, sighed. "They say they didn't take anything, but you assumed they did," Danielle finished. He frowned. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to keep order." "Order doesn't mean humiliation," she said evenly. "Check the shelf count before you shame somebody's child." The girls watched her, wide-eyed. A few seconds later, another staffer walked in holding a clipboard. "They didn't take anything," she said. "The snacks were already moved to the back room." The volunteer stammered an apology. The girls turned to leave, still shaken. Danielle touched one gently on the shoulder. "Hey," she said softly, "don't let moments like this tell you who you are." "You a teacher or something?" the girl asked. "No," Danielle said. "Just someone who knows what it feels like." She left the center with her pulse racing, not from fear, but from realization. Maybe she couldn't undo what happened to her, but she could stop it from repeating in front of her. That thought felt like oxygen. A month later, Ms. Green from Westbrook Market called. "We're hosting a community forum about bias and accountability," she said. "I wondered if you'd speak." Danielle hesitated. The idea of standing in that same store and talking about what she'd suffered made her throat tighten. But another voice inside whispered, "This is what strength looks like now." "I'll do it," she said finally. She spent the next week writing her speech, pages of memories, reflections, and lessons. Not a single word of pity. Only truth. On the evening of the event, folding chairs filled the front aisles of the store. Employees, shoppers, and local residents gathered under the bright lights. Danielle stood near the small podium, her palms damp, her heartbeat heavy. When Ms. Green introduced her, a hush fell over the crowd. Danielle took a slow breath and began. "A few months ago, I walked into this store after work. I bought milk, fruit, and bread. I left accused of being a thief." A murmur rippled through the room. She continued, voice calm but firm. "That night, I learned that sometimes people don't see you, they see a story they've already written in their heads. But I also learned that dignity is something they can't take unless you hand it over." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "The cameras cleared me. But it wasn't the footage that freed me, it was deciding that I wouldn't carry someone else's fear inside me anymore." A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A man in the back nodded slowly. "We can't control every bias," Danielle said, "but we can control what we become after facing it." I chose to keep standing. She closed her notes and looked up, her voice steady. "So to anyone who's ever been doubted, disrespected, or misjudged, don't shrink. Don't disappear. Live bigger. Live better. That's how you win." Applause filled the room, soft at first, then growing. Ms. Green hugged her tightly. Danielle felt tears sting her eyes, but they weren't the tears of the woman who'd once stood trembling under a store's fluorescent lights. They were the tears of someone who'd reclaimed her story. Later that night, she sat alone on her balcony. The city hummed below, streetlights glowed like patient stars. She sipped tea and listened to the wind, replaying the night's applause in her mind. She thought about Collins, not with rage, but with a strange, detached clarity. He had seen in her what he feared most, confidence where he expected apology, calm where he expected chaos. Maybe that was punishment enough. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Proud of you, sis. You didn't just survive, you taught." She smiled, typing back, "Still teaching myself, too." Weeks passed. Her story spread quietly through her hospital, through neighborhood circles, through people who'd never met her but felt seen by her courage. Yet she never called herself a hero. She was simply a woman who refused to vanish. One Saturday morning she met Keisha at a small cafe. They sat outside, sunlight pooling on the table. "You ever think about leaving Atlanta?" Keisha asked. "Sometimes," Danielle said. "But not yet. This city showed me who I was. I still have things to build here." "Like what?" Danielle stirred her coffee, smiling softly. "A life that doesn't apologize for existing." They laughed, and for a moment the world felt weightless again. Months later, as autumn settled in, Danielle walked through a downtown farmer's market. A little girl ran past her carrying a basket of apples, nearly bumping into her. The child's mother called out, "Careful, sweetheart." The girl turned, flashed a grin, and waved. Danielle waved back. She felt the cool wind lift her hair, smelled cinnamon and roasted nuts from a nearby stall, and realized she was truly present again, no longer bracing for judgment, no longer replaying that night in her mind. Every scar, every tremor of memory, had become part of her strength. When she got home that evening, she opened her journal to a new page and wrote, "I am not healed because the world changed. I am healed because I changed in it." Resilience isn't noise or fury. It's waking up every day and refusing to disappear. She closed the book, set it on her nightstand, and turned off the light. The room filled with stillness, not the silence of fear, but the peace that comes after you've faced the worst and discovered you're still standing. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, whispering against the window pane like a benediction. And Danielle Rivers, once accused, once humiliated, smiled in the dark, knowing the truth that no camera, no manager, no rumor could ever erase. She had not been broken. She had been reborn strong. Sometimes, the worst thing life can do to you is make you doubt yourself. They called her a thief. They made her stand under bright lights, surrounded by eyes that didn't see her truth. But what they didn't know was that they were building something inside her. See, pain doesn't always break you. Sometimes, it clears the fog. Sometimes, it teaches you what silence can't. Danielle didn't fight for revenge. She fought to remember who she was. And that's the kind of strength that can't be caught on camera. Because power, real power, isn't about how loud you shout. It's about how quietly you refuse to disappear. And maybe that's what we all need to remember. That every time they try to make you feel small, you have the choice to stand taller. To keep walking. To write your own ending. This was store manager accused her of theft, but the cameras told another story. If this story moved you, share it. Because somebody out there is living a moment just like this, and they need to know they're not alone. Subscribe for more powerful stories from Buchi Grind, where every story has a heartbeat, and every heartbeat has a truth.